Walt, lo and behold, Bloomberg is reporting what we've been saying on autonomy markets is indeed true, that President-elect Trump is going to look to implement a national autonomous vehicle framework. Bravo, President-elect Trump. If this happens, do investors get the certainty that they need to invest in the sector?
No, unfortunately not. I mean, it's definitely a positive. I think in the venture community, it's certainly a step forward, but that in itself is not going to like be this magic moment when investors I don't want to go back on what we said in past podcasts. It's certainly important. At the end of the day, these companies have to deliver products. They have to have a technology that works. They have to open new markets. In Waymo's case, they have to move it onto freeways. So now, it's great that the Trump administration is hopefully going to progress in this manner. But I'm not sure that is the seminal moment that's going to change investor sentiment about this space. By the way, investor sentiment has already been changing, as we know. I mean, in just consumer sentiment. In my Twitter feed, yes, I'm still on Twitter. I haven't rage quit like all the other people that are out there crying, running off to whatever the latest parlor is. But on Twitter, you're seeing more people, they get in rides on Waymo and are talking about the same thing that I had, this life-changing experience and the light bulb going off, which speaks to, how getting this in more markets, getting more social media posts like that is going to help the overall process. Trump alone can't necessarily fix this. There's going to be battles, I think, probably at the state and local level, which maybe you can speak to.
We also had Fox News record a live segment in the back of a Waymo this week. That was a big step. While investors are uncertain, I'll use the word uncertain for this. If you look at what the crypto industry went through, where it is we're going to get a crypto czar now in the President Trump's administration. If we get an autonomy czar or an autonomous vehicle czar, does that help build that confidence and trust with investors?
Everything is incremental. Everything is important. I don't know if those become necessarily seminal moments. Again, the seminal moments at this point are more in the laps of the companies to go to the next step, going to an airport, getting it on a freeway. For the trucking companies that we're looking at, going driver out in more than perhaps just Dallas to Houston. Like, those are the seminal moments that I think investors have moved on to. Regulatory is certainly going to be an important component of it, but it's probably the risk factor of not having a national framework, which is probably not even fully appreciated by investors in the first place.
From the trucking standpoint, investors want to see over-the-road, multi-state hauls with no driver. And then for the passenger side, is airports and freeways the big thing that investors are looking for?
I think that's exactly right, Grace. And, we're all hearing about Dallas and Houston, like, find me a different state, make it interstate. And again, you're going to probably require a framework in order to do that. And on the cars, yeah, freeways in the case of Waymo. And in the case of Tesla, just getting something lit up. I think in past podcasts we've talked about, I think it was Palo Alto that they were considering a test. Them moving on to the next level safely, obviously, is going to be certainly plenty of opportunities as we enter 2025 for what we in the investor world call catalysts, things that move stocks one way or another, move investment sentiment one way or another. National framework gets announced on like a Thursday in February, whatever it is. Like, is Uber stock going to be down 3% on that particular date? Probably not. Waymo announcing, 3 new cities, depending on who their partners in the city. That going to move Uber and Lyft and whatever autonomy stocks are public at that moment, 3%? Yes. So I think that probably gives you a better perspective or context for what's relevant in the investor mind.
On the Bloomberg article, Uber sold off 8% on the fears of robotaxi. And you have Brad Gerster from Altimore Capital. He went on CNBC proclaiming that 2025 is the year of robotaxi and publicly stating that he sold off his Uber stake.
That's a fair pushback to me saying that no, that a national framework isn't important. But I think to answer that specifically in that incident, I think it's more of like a reminder of Elon's relationship with Trump. Elon's down in your neck of the woods, apparently living, I don't know, has he moved into Mar-a-Lago?
That's the word on the street.
Spending a lot of time there. So I think yes, the framework did have an impact. So obviously that refutes everything I literally just said. But I think it's more of the reminder of is this a framework to help Elon? And as I've said on multiple podcasts before, while Elon's influence on Trump could, create things that are positive for Tesla, it's not going to only be positive for Tesla. It will be positive broadly across the industry. And maybe in some cases positive across the autonomous industry is not necessarily going to be perceived as positive for Uber and Lyft. But yeah, let's see what Altimeter's saying about their views on Uber and autonomy.
Because of how bullish you've been on Uber.
Yeah.
You sold it.
Listen, let me say at the start, Dara has been an incredible CEO at Uber. He's dramatically increased the free cash flow. He's increased the competitive, position of that company. They're the dominant leader now in global mobility. We love the company, and it's inexpensive. However, leading up to the election, right, we have been taking down our position size, and we've been rotating into Tesla. Why? Because I said before, we had a ChatGPT moment around full self-driving in 2024. I think the year of 2025 is going to be about robotaxi. We were present at the robotaxi day. We were impressed by the robotaxi. And so for Uber, they have to get past this moment, right, where, they have a hugely disruptive force coming in the case of Tesla. And now we know that the Trump administration is going to push, right, for a national regulatory change so that will be good for Waymo and good for Tesla. Now, Uber has a solution to this, right? They have Waymos on their platform, but we just want to see it play out. We want to see a few more months of this playing out. So, again, it comes back to portfolio management. For us, the optics, right? And certainly right after the election, we bought more Tesla and we rotated out of our remaining Uber because we think the optics are going to be really tough for Uber over the course of the next few months. And they're going to be really good for Tesla as we get closer and closer to the launch of robotaxi, which we think will be Q2 of next year.
This feels to me like, the goalposts moved.
Yeah.
Musk's proximity to power, that dynamic has changed. He is becoming quite obvious, a very influential voice in some of the policies that are going to happen, whether they are beneficial to him personally or beneficial to his companies, plural, because I think you could make that argument. That's what this strikes me as, is the goalposts moving in some respects to favor Tesla and in some respects hurt the competitors.
No, I would disagree with that. I think the
regulations that we said of ending the EV tax credits, easing the self-driving regulations, those are undeniable.
But if they change the regulations, but FSD wasn't killing it the way 12.5 is and the way FSD 13 is going, where you have 1,000x improvement in full self-driving safety in 1 year alone versus the 10% per year we were getting up until 2020 because we've gone from these deterministic models to these imitation learning models. It's about the performance at Tesla that is driving us. Now, sure, I think national regulation makes sense. In a country of interstate commerce, does it make sense that one state's going to allow me to drive my Tesla on full self-driving mode, then I get to the state intersection between Texas and Oklahoma, and I no longer can use full self-driving? I have to stop the car and change the mode of driving? That doesn't make any sense, right? We drive cars across state borders. So having a national regulatory framework, not just for Tesla, for everybody, for GM, for Waymo, for everybody, that's just the right policy. I don't think it's about favoring Musk or his companies, though I think regulatory clarity is needed in this country. But I look at it, it's the improvements that are going on in Tesla. And I think, 18 months ago, nobody would have said that this was winner take all or winner take most. They would have said everybody's going to have full self-driving capabilities. I will tell you right now, Tesla is running away with their full self-driving capabilities. The only other game in town really is Waymo.
The interesting thing about Brad, he was an Uber bull. I mean, he sold out of his entire position, and he had that breakthrough around 12.36, and then the big breakthrough at 12.51. And I'm going to give credit where credit's due, because this is important to give credit. It was the podcast that Brad did with Bill Gurley that led me to buying my Tesla, because they went on and on for an episode over an hour of saying there was a breakthrough. I didn't believe it. I was a skeptic at that point. I bought it. I believed it. We've got less than 10 days left in the month. Tesla is publicly stating that we will get FSD 13 by the end of the month. If the hype lives up to reality and FSD 13 is as good as it says, is that another catalyst for Tesla and another downside for Uber.
Absolutely. Like if the reports on FSD 13 are positive, then yeah, that's again one of these catalysts that will be negative for Uber and Lyft. But to get back to the Brad thing, which you kind of skipped over, you should never fall in love with your investments. And the best fund managers, hedge fund managers, portfolio, whatever it is, new information, or you see the risk. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of the overhang. Brad's not saying Uber is going to be in trouble next year or the year after that, but he recognizes the year of the autonomy 25, the catalyst, the headline risk of a lot of the things that we've talked about here on autonomy markets that could have an impact on these stocks one way or another. And again, I'll give you a perfect example. If we believe that Waymo is going to announce 5 new markets for 2025, that, hey, we're going to go into market. Like, what if, the stocks will react differently. If they say we're going to partner with Uber in all of them, that's going to be really bad for Lyft and really positive for Uber. I think people are having a lot of questions about Lyft. If Lyft announces that we are going to do New York City with Waymo and we're going to be fleet management, we're going to do a lot more for them than even Uber was planning on doing. That's going to be incrementally very positive for Lyft, potentially negative, but I think actually positive for Uber because it indicates that Waymo is partnering. Door number 3, Waymo says we're doing these all as Waymo only markets. That's going to be negative for those stocks. And we could all debate what that actually means in the next 2 to 3 years. I'm just telling you how those stocks are going to react and how the investor reaction is going to be, because you're going to take every incremental data point and try and predict what that end game is. And that end game is the value that you're putting that huge multiple on. So these near-term things, while they seem small in an investor mind for stocks like this, where you're discounting future growth, it is obviously going to be very important. I think in Brad's mind, those catalysts are going to be a lot about autonomy, which is probably going to be negative for those stocks. He's probably, if that gets processed and Uber sells off, or maybe Uber doesn't sell off and all the news is out there on these autonomy things that happen, he'll get on CNBC and say, I just bought all Uber back because these things have been discounted in the names and I think Uber is going to be a player. That's what good investment managers do. You shift based on what the new information is, and you don't fall in love with your past opinions.
That's well said. I agree with that. On the Lyft side, fleet management's expensive. Why would you want it? It's very labor expensive. It's insurance. There's a lot of aspects to that. Why would you want to have that drag?
Uber has Uber Eats. Uber has international markets. Uber's got a lot of different stuff. That's where they've chosen to invest. If I'm Lyft and I'm in this market, maybe I don't have geographic expansion, and the future could be in fleets, whether it's autonomous or not. There's value that you can add, and if it's hard, even better, because if you can do it right and be the partner, that's the value add that you can provide in that overall ecosystem. So I think that's why you do it.
That business could always be chopped off and sold at some point. A Rush or a Ryder could buy it. I don't want to say I'm waffling. I'm debating with myself a lot about the Uber, Waymo, potential Lyft partnerships. Tesla has clearly stated on their public filings, and Mr. Musk has stated on X, that it's going to be the Tesla app or perhaps a Tesla robotaxi app as a companion. Why does Waymo need Uber or need Lyft? Because if your account, my account on X, people are raving about it. And they're in the common denominator, they're downloading the Waymo app.
I would go back to episode 2, and I think you addressed this head on, and I think convinced me more of the power of the Uber and Lyft app. And when you talk to these companies, they will tell you about all of the engineering hours and the difficulty that it takes to deliver the service that they're doing, and like matching this massive supply with this massive demand. More simplistically, why do they need them? Forget about the tech, just scale. You want to be in a lot of markets, but like if you're really going to do it in a market where your wait time is going to be, let's call it sub 10 minutes, sub 5 minutes, how many incremental cars do you really need? Like, okay, we talk about Waymo having a 15-minute wait. What's the wait on a busy Friday? Like, how many cars, if they added the airport, how many additional cars are they going to need? So as they grow, they're going to need likely, a partner, and that helps them to grow geographically until they scale up the volume of their cars.
Staying on the partner theme, Uber has an appetite. They're like the big, heavy, overset uncle that shows up at Thanksgiving and eats the whole turkey and leaves nothing for everybody when it comes to IPOs and autonomy investments. They're in Wabi, they're in Aurora, and now there's been several reports of investing in Pony AI. Why is Uber being that uncle at Thanksgiving that's just gobbling stuff up?
I think honestly, it's just have a seat at the table. Understand, like if you're investing, maybe you have a board seat. Understand what's going on. I don't think they have any right of first refusal to buy these companies. I don't know. Maybe they do. I don't think all the terms are already discussed. It's a signal to investors like, hey, we're out there, we're investing in this stuff. Like, we're just not going to get killed by autonomy. We're investing in autonomy. But the reality is, like, what is a minority investment in any of these companies? How does that ultimately protect you if autonomy does develop the app, does get the scale, and does ultimately kill you? It doesn't, right? It doesn't. But it just keeps you, I think, in the mix. I'm not sure it's really necessary, but it's a seat at the table.
We're autonomy markets and we follow the money. So I'm going to follow the money on this. This is a hypothetical. Hypothetically, because this has been reported. If Uber does invest in Pony AI, they'll be joining the cap table along with Toyota. Toyota is the largest outside shareholder in Pony AI. Robert Scoble tweeted this week that Toyota is planning to bring Chinese batteries and Chinese autonomy to America. For all practical purposes, Pony AI is a Chinese company, even though it was founded in Fremont. A majority of their operations, revenue, and deployment are in China. I've been in the vehicle in Fremont, California, and it was phenomenal. Hypothetical, if Toyota put the Pony AI tech in there and ran it, does that become a competitor? And that could be Toyota's answer to robotaxis?
Yeah, but again, you're talking about Chinese components, and I'm as interested as anyone in terms of how does our, trade issues with China, how far does it extend? There's a lot of things that were said prior to the first Trump administration that didn't necessarily see the follow through. I don't think Mexico paid for a wall to get built between our countries. So we'll see what actually gets delivered, but certainly there's, risk in that. Does it get that deep? Does TikTok get banned? Does, are the Zeekr cars bounced? Like, I don't know how deep, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. If I'm Waymo, I might be more concerned about not the Chinese cars that I'm doing, but partnering with Jaguar after that commercial that they put out and the rebranding. I think that talk about being out of touch with the current the current environment. For those that didn't see it, you can clip in the video into our podcast. Maybe people think that Jaguar will have been advertising on autonomy markets. They are not. Does that have an impact on Waymo, Grayson?
Yes, point blank. Well, I think it is a risk. It is a big risk. You're on the finance side. I'm on the autonomy side. But I know some of your acronyms, so I got to be a little clever there. And I know the KYC acronym. And for our listeners who don't know, it stands for KYC is Know Your Customer. And guess what Jaguar failed? They failed the bank audit. They don't know their customer. I had lunch with an individual today. He said, bring back the British Racing Green. Bring back the V12. Bring back the V8. Bring back those big, beautiful lines. They're out of touch. And you're right, because now you have a president that is very outspoken. He doesn't use X as much. He uses truth. One tweet from President Trump calling this DEI stuff, which what it is, Jaguar's going down the toilet tubes. And if we saw Tata Motors when the ad came out, the stock sold off heavily. Another risk. Robbie Starbuck gets involved. That's another big risk.
I mean, what if he connects it to Waymo? Like, I don't want to get in one of those Waymo cars in San Francisco of all places. Like, look at that. It's a Jaguar in San Francisco. And he besmirches the Waymo, which is using these cars based on some random commercial. We've seen crazier things happen with products that have kind of gone down that path, for sure.
It was, well, going to one of my favorite terms, an unforced error. There's just no way around looking at it. But on the bright side with Waymo, the California Public Utilities Commission saying that they drove over 312,000 rides in August. That's up from 77,000 in January. And that was in San Francisco alone. Waymo's scaling big time.
Now, Grayson, I have a question for you in Trump world. Now you're down in Mar-a-Lago land. The president nominated this Congressman Duffy for Secretary of Transportation. That's something investors, I don't think, are really paying attention to. Should they? Like, what is what is the importance in autonomy markets of Congressman Duffy in this role?
The importance is the regulatory aspect where Congressman Duffy will implement a national autonomous vehicle framework. Which is important to know about Congressman Duffy is he's pro-innovation, he's pro-autonomy, and he has the full trust of the president. Those three elements will enable Congressman Duffy to implement a regulatory framework for autonomous vehicles that will allow them to scale over state lines. That's the importance.
So it's just the implementation of the framework, and this is the right person to do it.
Yes, that's one way to say it. Congressman Duffy is the right person because he is a former congressman. He knows how DC works. He knows how things get done. And depending on where they're going to execute this, there are multiple scenarios going around. Well, one of being kicked around, are they going to do it through the White House Office of Science and Technology? But you still need your regulatory arm, which will be DOT. So you have to have a very good relationship between the Department of Transportation and the White House. And Congressman Duffy, in my opinion, is the ideal candidate to do that.
So when we talk about going back to the very first topic, which is, do investors care about the framework? Okay, maybe I overstated. Yes, they obviously care, and yes, it's important. But day two of that is the implementation. So should investors, and should we here at Autonomy Markets, be closely following what Congressman Duffy is doing? And if not him, or if in addition to him, who are going to be the other key federal agency players in terms of the implementation of this? Because you can say we're going to do a national framework, but then we have to see what it looks like and see what the implementation is and how much of that is effective.
President Trump is building all-star cabinet. I'm not saying that politically. I'm politically neutral. I have one issue: autonomy. I'm very public about that. President Trump late last night, I was out with somebody who's actually in the running for AG. That person remained anonymous. That person did not get it, but Pam Bondi got the Attorney General. It's very important to know that Ms. Bondi is extremely pro-autonomy. Under Governor Scott, helped to implement the autonomous vehicle law here in the state of Florida. So President Trump has a cabinet that is being picked very strategically. I'm not saying the president's doing it for autonomy, with individuals that are pro-autonomy. And probably the most important individual that is not going to have to go through Senate confirmation is Senior Advisor Stephen Miller of the America First Policy Project. Mr. Miller will play a very critical role in implementing this policy, and we look forward as the autonomous vehicle community to working with Mr. Miller to ensure that America leads on autonomy.
So first of all, I don't think it's good to have people that are like knowledgeable, right? Because anyone that talks to the president it's beneficial to have them knowledgeable and positive about it. But at the end of the day, AG is not going to have, I don't see, impact on this industry.
Oh, big time.
Tell me why.
Big time when the states start suing, and you've got a wackadoodle state representative in New Mexico that wants to ban autonomous trucks and autonomous cars.
Okay. Then I'm wrong. So that's important to have. And then that person not only has experience, but is certainly a very forward AG, right? Now let's move on to Miller. I thought Miller's thing was like immigration and stuff. Like, so is it just him being knowledgeable about it? So when they're having these meetings, he's like, yes, I think we should do this. Or what more specific role do you see him playing?
Let's go down the strategic rabbit hole here. Ms. Bondi was the co-chair the America First Policy Institute of Florida. Ms. Bondi her job was at Ballard Partners. Brian Ballard is another pro-autonomy person. Ballard Partners represents Google. They represent Amazon. Their interests are aligned on autonomy there. Mr. Miller's America First Policy Institute has drafted autonomous vehicle regulations for President Trump. So Mr. Miller is going to have an outsized influence on autonomy in this Trump administration.
This is great. This is great, Grayson. I mean, this is like Grayson's DC corner. We're getting definitively in the weeds. Who else should we be looking at in terms of key personnel, maybe that are yet to be appointed, that will give investors signal about how this is going to get implemented and how quickly and how much they can tamper down state interference on getting a national framework?
Out of respect for the process of nominations and not to interfere with certain nominees.
How about just roles then? You don't have to name names. How about just roles? Like, what roles do you think will be critical in implementing a national framework?
NHTSA administrator, and there is several individuals that are in the running who have interviewed at Mar-a-Lago that are good human beings, very smart individuals that will do this. The big concern that I have and other individuals in Trump world is the bureaucracy and the bureaucrats inside of DOT and NHTSA will try and steamroll us. Another very important position to watch is a general counsel for the Department of Transportation, because the lawsuits are going to come hot and furious, and that individual has to have a very strong backbone and has to be an advocate for this industry. So there are some strategic roles there. Also the undersecretary.
And who appoints that person? Is that the attorney general basically putting that in place? Is it the head of transportation that's hiring their own lawyer? I guess it's could be the transition team.
The transition team will make a recommendation to the Secretary of Transportation. The Secretary of Transportation will pick their general counsel. There has been individuals that have interviewed who would have been extraordinary at the job, but due to family circumstances were unable to proceed with the vetting. But that will be a very important role to watch. And there are a couple individuals now that are still in the process that will do a very, very good job. We have a very good bench of lawyers in the autonomous vehicle industry that will do a very good job to implement this policy.
Well, exciting times. So if these people are raring to go, and that maybe that is in our 2025 catalyst, then seeing some movement out of these different agencies and different people within the administration.
It's in our 2025 catalyst, and us here at Autonomy Markets, we'll be spending a lot of time in DC as DC will become one of the hot autonomy markets, even though the vehicle is not necessarily going to be there, but from a policy perspective. And from a vehicle perspective in Washington, D.C., the D.C. Council is looking at allowing fully autonomous driverless vehicles to operate in the district. So it's moving.
I mean, one of the other things you mentioned, Grayson, but you failed to mention one outside organization that could help you with that overstaffing. I think you said was at NHTSA or wherever it was, is DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And maybe they will play a role in helping to clean out some of the obstacles, some of the bureaucratic obstacles that you were just complaining about.
100% believe that. And Mr. Musk's interests are aligned for DOT, what Mr. Musk wants to achieve with a regulatory framework for what DOGE is looking to accomplish. Trim off the fat. That's what they're going to do. And the interesting thing about DOGE, which I have to give Mr. Ramaswamy a lot of credit, Mr. Musk a lot of credit on, they're going to do a weekly podcast and put everything in full transparency to the public. Because what they're going to do is then have the public on their side. It's going to be harder for the bureaucracy to fight that when the public is on their side for, if you want to use the term was used today, radical transparency.
You need to get them on Road to Autonomy then to kick their podcast off with your podcast.
I'll just tell you, crazier things have happened and there's ongoing conversations.
All right, let's move on to the next topic. What do we got?
We got China. Because if we staying on the theme, autonomous vehicles, this has been floated by several individuals, is a national security issue. Autonomy in China is ramping up. It is a priority of President Xi. There was an individual in Congress today who was talking about it. President Xi is working, I put that in quotes, on a national framework for autonomous vehicles in China. We both know working means you're doing it. And in Q3, Baidu successfully completed 988,000 autonomous vehicle trips, of which 691,000 were fully autonomous with no safety driver. Autonomy is clearly scaling in China. What are your thoughts?
Well, let's put some context around that. 691,700 driver out. So Waymo is driver out, right? That's an autonomous. And if they're doing 150 a week, based on simple math, in Q3, they did nearly 2 million autonomous rides. So once again, the U.S. is winning. And in this case, 2 million is much larger than 700,000. We're going to we have opportunities to more closely track some of the autonomy development in China because you have two companies that have just gone public. You had WeRide, which we already talked about. Pony AI is doing their IPO. You referenced earlier Uber taking a stake. Investor-wise, as I mentioned before, probably not huge interest. WeRide, I think the float was like 150 million of new money. There was a private placement alongside of it. Who knows if those guys are selling or not, but it's hard for institutional investors to play in that small numbers, although that didn't stop Morgan Stanley, who banked them, to initiate coverage with a 32-page report. But I digress. This new one, Pony AI, similar overall market valuation, $4 or $5 billion, raising $260 million. Bigger, right? But 260 in terms of tradable volume, which I think, unless I'm looking at the numbers right, that's the number. Again, hard for institutional investors to really play, even though it is a $5 billion company, just based on the trading volume and liquidity, but gives us an opportunity to get some additional window into how China is developing beyond, what some of these other companies, larger companies, have talked about.
And we now have access to the Chinese market, so we'll be able to offer more insights to our listeners and viewers in the weeks going forward through some new relationships we've been able to forge. The interesting thing we had in the news in China this week, outside of Baidu's miles, they've announced a sub $35,000 self-driving car, which is called the Apollo RT6. It seems that Baidu's on a crash course to become the Tesla of China. Even though Tesla is currently operating in China, it seems that's where they're going. Is that where you see this going? It seems like this can be personally owned autonomous vehicle with this model.
I have no idea. What are your thoughts on that as a Chinese Tesla?
You got Xiaomi, you got XPeng. There's various other companies that are competing there. To me, the clear signal is the personally owned autonomous vehicle market is emerging, and it's emerging fast. And it looks like it will emerge in China before the United States, just based on the regulatory environment and then the willingness to push it. And staying on China, we're going to go off the mainland. We're going to go to Hong Kong right now. The Chinese government, which for all factor purposes does control Hong Kong, is now allowing Baidu to test airport pickup and drop-offs at the Hong Kong International Airport. Another sign they're moving a lot faster than we are, unfortunately.
Now, you just talked, Grayson, about all these people that were getting hired in the Trump administration and the national framework and cutting the bureaucracy. And then you follow up by saying you think China is going to move faster. So which is it? Is the Trump administration going to reaccelerate it? Because the last time he was in office, there was a race to 5G. Now, I would argue that this is a wireless term when we're going into the telco corner. At the time, Chairman Pai of the FCC did a great job getting a lot of spectrum. And I think we generally won 5G. 5G turned out to be a bit of a dud. Let's hope the same is not true for autonomy. But why do you have such little faith in our administration and our companies, where all the best technology is in this country is developed to progress faster? Just because they're willing to let more people on the road? Because, going back to WeRide, you talk about, I looked at the WeRide prospectus and their area of coverage. Granted, this is only one company, and there's other larger companies doing better things. And they're like limiting it to whatever it is, one safety driver for every 3 cars. That doesn't seem to me like they're in advance. And then we just talked about how Waymo has significantly more rides than the stat that you had provided. So why the negativity about America?
The negativity in America stops on January 20, 2025 at 12:01 p.m. when leadership comes back to the White House. Because we've incubated Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, Berkeley, Georgia Tech, incubated some of the smartest minds in the world. And because of our regulatory environment and the anti-automation and anti-autonomous approach taken by the current administration, they left to build these companies when they should have been built here. That's where the negativity comes from. But the negativity stops on January 20th at 12:01 p.m. when President Trump is sworn in. And we're going to make autonomy an America first policy. We're going to make autonomy great again in America.
I can't believe I was able to get you that wound up. But you're the one that started talking about China being ahead. But I think you were just using typical political fear tactics to get people to worry about China. Valid concern, though. We do need to lead. We need to protect the products in the U.S. And certainly those are important factors for investors in these U.S. companies. They don't want to invest in companies that they think China is going to come in and effectively commoditize it in this country, or the international markets that our companies in the U.S. want to sell into. So important topics.
It's very important because we have to look at history as our guide. You're the Wall Street guy. I'm just this wonky guy. The Belt and Road Initiative, which President Xi in China implemented, took over the global supply chain for electric vehicle materials, minerals, and most importantly, they cleared the way in China to allow the refining of precious metals, where you cannot build a refinery here in America because the EPA, that goes away under President Trump. We're going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to mine, baby, mine. And that's going to come. And if we allowed these policies of the last 4 years to continue over to the next 4 years, then we would have been importing autonomy from China. And think of all the national security risks that go on this, and go to telco corner, all the telecom risks. You have Huawei and all these cars. You have all the risks. The risks go away on January 20th.
I mean, telco, that's already happened. I don't remember under which president, but that infrastructure has been banned. They've tried to prop up non-Chinese vendors. I think there was, at least speculation that for the large manufacturers in China, the government was basically paying for electricity. There's a lot of subsidies to try and allow them to take share that, they were successfully pushed back upon. Some may argue that increased the capex that telcos had to pay. But I think, even today in the wireless area, some of the best development come from wireless developers, in this country. So I think, these are policies that we'll see if it can help protect, as well as it's less about, in my mind, about protection. It's more about advancement. And helping these companies succeed by lifting the regulations within our own country that may or may not exist that are preventing them, or, spurring future development, or enabling large companies that do have the capital to deal with this. Don't necessarily, you have to kneecap them to a certain extent based on, let's say, Google's power in search, but not to the point where their investments in Waymo suffer and we as a country suffer in terms of the economic growth available to us with the development of those products.
Autonomy is going to become an economy that I call the autonomy economy. We need a level playing field because regulatory certainty will unleash investment, allow these companies to build. That's what's going to happen in a pitch. If you think autonomy is great, I'm selling Make Autonomy Great red hats on store.roadtoautonomy.com.
Are you really? Oh, God, that's amazing.
I am. I'm going to rock it next week for you.
Can I just give you one counterpoint to this very pro-administration, commentary, which is, both parties are anti-big tech. And Google is the leading developer, Tesla to a lesser extent, maybe in your mind to a greater extent in autonomy. And there is a war against big tech. Like the chairman of the FCC is dealing with them on one front, and the vice president has talked about his support on another front. So, there's also this concern over the size of big tech, and that may have some impact based on other motivations that the administration has. Even like Elon is going to be negatively impacted by the elimination of the $7,500 EV credits that are out there. So it's not all roses necessarily, depending on which policies get implemented. If Google gets challenged on the AI development and AI becomes a critical function of how an end-to-end solution for Waymo is going to be used, and they're basically forcing Google, which is what they want to do, to give up data so that other people can be competitive in AI, that has broader impacts across the different product sets. So I think there can sometimes be some puts and takes beyond tariffs and regulation in terms of, state to state, all the stuff that we've already talked about in this podcast.
Elon, as has been reported publicly, has lobbied to get rid of the tax credit because it does benefit Tesla, because then you have to buy the carbon offset credits in California and other markets from Tesla. So that helps their business, also gives Tesla more competitive moat because they figured out pricing. As it relates to autonomy creates jobs. Autonomy will lower inflation, and autonomy is going to fill in the labor void. And it looks like the labor void is only going to get bigger, and that becomes a huge growth market for automation and autonomy going forward. It's the future. It's the way that we're going. And we know next week we're going to sit down and eat lots of turkey and drink good wine. Outside of turkey, wine, and football, what do we need to look for in autonomy markets? Because I'm rocking the red hat next week. It's going on.
I think, the Friday after Thanksgiving and the Wednesday before Thanksgiving is when companies bury bad news. So we don't know what's going to happen next week, but it's probably something bad. Maybe some job cuts. I don't know. It's always horrible to cut someone like the day before, the day after Thanksgiving, but there's nothing on the agenda. Let's hope it's a quiet week. Let's hope we have very little to talk about next week. But unfortunately, that's a news dump time. And we'll have to see what happens.
Hopefully, we're not reporting and covering the bad news bear situation. Hopefully, we have something happy to talk about because autonomy is moving. It's a global economy, and it's not just in America. There's movements happening here. Perhaps next week we'll get into Wave because there's a lot of big things coming with Alex Kendall and the company you're building at the UK and Wave, or perhaps we get into Oxa as well in the UK. You can make it UK week. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is building and scaling autonomy in America. Walt, until next week.